So that's interesting.
There we go. There's a recording. All right. So you've used it not as broadly, and so I'm turning on my
Mhm.
camera too here. You've used it not as broadly, right? In smaller with smaller brushes and
Yeah,
something that might be 4 by 5 inches or 5 by 6 inches. And so you use it really teeny, right?
like usually I do a lot of like vultures randomly. Vultures and cats, and so I do a lot of like just
Yeah.
which
Mhm.
you know
Um, which you
trying to
can
bring
do at
that.
that size, right? You can do it at that size.
Mhm.
I understand. Um, I think that there's a confidence that comes with learning to use bigger brushes for larger areas. So, if you're working 4 by 5 inches or 5 by 6 inches, you might not feel compelled to pick up a bigger brush because you want to cover an area faster. I have also this, I also try to encourage students in my portrait and figure painting class in oils similarly because they have the same trepidation about picking up a big brush
Mhm.
and putting in a background and just going, and just get that in there, right? And then you can play around with the edges later. And with gouache, you really can, and with oil, you really can play around with the edges later. As opposed to watercolor, which depending upon how you're using it, you might be worried about if you're putting in this big wash, you're worried about overlapping areas that you want to keep white so that you can use that white later. So blah, 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 all of that stuff with watercolor. But with gouache, you don't have to worry so much about whether you're going to overlap another object on your painting, something in the foreground, because you're just going to be able to go in and fix it. So also, when you're using brushes that are bigger, you can learn to use them several different ways. And then you can get more confident with going around, painting around. So my husband and I managed to figure out what was wrong with the lighting, which had to do with my camera and not the lights. So we have better lighting now. Um, Let me show you. Hopefully, let's see. Um, we reach up here and press. Hang on, I'm going to stand up here. I can't see my camera. That's that. And here we go. I want this to be big. Thank you. Okay, so we have better lighting. We had this, basically, we didn't have the settings on my camera where they needed to be for the video function I'm using. So now I have the camera taking in more light from the environment and yay, right? And
Yeah,
so
that is better.
yes, it's way better. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about that. I was looking at that thinking, crap, I have to fix that. That is not, how can you work from that? You guys can't work from that, right? So this is what I'm seeing. This is really close. This is what my hands look like in reality, right? More or less. And this is very close to what I see here on my table with variations, with your monitors, right? You're going to vary. So this is how we're going to be working now. You can see my palette much better. You can see the colors much better. So yay, so I'm super happy about this. So anyway, just needed to brag on that. Back to so that I'm hoping that will help with the picture being lighter and clearer, you seeing what I'm doing. It'll help you guys see what I'm doing. Okay, I'm switching back to FaceTime. And um, so you were talking about, oh yeah, so we were talking about the big brush, and I can show you, maybe you can be able to see more better today because I'm gonna mess with my painting here. And I want to mess with it in ways that show you two how to make some changes, right? And I can show you a little bit about how to use a bigger brush with a flat or what this is called a bright actually, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Um, and you can use it like a chisel. and you can kind of chisel around objects because you can use it sideways for a thinner line and straight for, to make a big flat stroke. So I'll be showing you, because I'm going to mess around with my background and hopefully show you some ways to reactivate the paint, make gradations, darken areas, and possibly even cover the background, which is tricky, but I can try to do this for you. We'll talk about ways to do that. But first, and I'll address, we can also address some of your questions, Lauren, about how you got basically, you had paint running into paint. And usually that has to do with having wet paint against another area of wet paint, just like in watercolor, where you would put in a wash and then you have to let it dry before you can come in and put some detail next to it. I mean, that's my guess. It is the nature of Zoom that I can't just come over and start painting on your painting, which I would be doing if we had an in-person class. So, and we have to do it, in a more clunky manner. So before we do that, though, I thought that I do a screen share and show you, I'll talk about, I went on to dickblick.com, and I pulled up the Winsor & Newton gouache. I'm still learning Zoom. I'm still going, wait, what? All right, so here's the Dick Blick listing of Winsor & Newton gouache. And Winsor & Newton is the brand that I'm most familiar with, although I've been using M. Graham also, and some Holbein. If those lines have colors that I want, I will buy them. And we can talk more about different brands. I don't use, I don't have a lot of experience with other brands, but we can talk about it on another class. So, but I just wanted to show you some things about this page because they've made improvements even since fall when I taught an in-person class at OSA and actually went on to Dick Blick. And I didn't go to Jerry's Artorama, which is the other site that I tend to buy from. So I didn't compare, but this improvement has been made to Dick Blick. And they've even improved it more since. And this was a lot of information here that didn't used to be available in the dark ages when I was in school, where you really didn't have the internet and you didn't even had mail order catalogs, which we had in like the 1990s and 80s. But in the 1970s, we had just your local art supply store and what they stocked. And we didn't have any kind of online tools to see information about the paint, but now we do, and it's pretty great. So I wanted to show you what we have. So they just made this change since fall. Instead of a list of paints, they used to just have this list with swatches, and it was alphabetical. And now they have a color chart, which is really helpful because you have different colors grouped together. You can make comparisons. You can see how dark certain colors are that are dark, right? If you're looking at dark colors. And they also have a tint here. This right here is a tint where they've added a bit of white to the color. And that helps you see sometimes the tinting strength of color. It'll help you see that and how the color cools when tinted. So for instance, this color is really cooled with white. That color is really cooled with white, so you can see how the white affects the color. This is really cooled with white. So, and if I click on a color, so I'm going to click on Winsor Violet here. And this is where you would add to cart, right? But there's more information here and it's nice and convenient. So I can click on show pigment information here. It has a drop down. It tells you what pigment. So dioxazine violet, I've been calling this dioxazine violet, so it's not really a mystery. But there are a lot of pigments here. When I click on this, I'm not familiar with the pigment. But with time and experience, you'll get familiar with some pigments like cadmium and like phthalo and different cadmium, colors, and like cobalt, if you use cobalt, and obviously dioxazine here. And it talks about the properties. It's transparent, high tinting strength, it stains. So it's basically kind of like a dye, very dark, right? So almost a black when used at full strength. When concentrated, it paints out nearly black. Yes, thank you. And it mixes with white to form a bright, opaque tints of purple. Okay. And it also, they can often talk about permanence here, but they're not mentioning it here. We're going to go someplace else to look at the permanence or fugitive qualities of the paint. So they talk about the history, which is pretty interesting with some of the older pigments. So you can learn a lot here if you're curious. But you will learn with experience and become familiar, if you haven't already, with certain pigments and dyes that are ubiquitous, like cadmiums and like the earth colors. And those colors tend to be kind of consistent across mediums, but but sometimes you'll take a color like burnt umber, and in gouache, it's not as dark as it is in oil, so you'll note differences. But basically, you'll get familiar with pigments. So when you pick up a new medium, you go, oh, yes, burnt umber. I know about burnt umber, right? I'm familiar with that. So if you come up here to the top, I scrolled back up. Here we are back at the top. And you go here to resources. I'm going to have to probably go, when I open this screen, I'm going to have to go out of the share and then reshare and select this image. But so to view a PDF color chart, please click here. Now, all of the manufacturers don't have a color chart, but many of them do, but some don't. Okay, I'm launching this, and you probably can't see it. So let's see. Let me go down here. All right. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to reshare with this image. Okay, so here's the color chart that I just launched. Let me see if I can. I was just thinking of Photoshop. It would be helpful if I could. Oh, let me see here. How about this? No, that's not working. How about this is something for me too. Aha. Yay. Okay. Okay, so I'm zooming in on this. So again, this is listed in order, so very helpful, and you can compare colors. But what you have here is information, little codes about the permanence and some about the opacity too. So you can go down here. There is let me scroll over. Okay. So we go over here. We have a key, so to speak, like a map. Double A is extremely permanent. A is permanent. This is what we would like to strive for in our color choices. Moderately durable, fugitive. Some of these colors that are extremely fugitive don't have any rating at all. And then then we also have an ASTM rating, 1 for excellent light fastness and 2 for good. And then, so we have 2 rating systems here. And then we've got opacity. So it's important. I've learned this the hard way because we didn't have any of this information when I was in school and after I was in school. And there was just the general knowledge that some reds and violets and particularly pinks were very fugitive and really only meant for reproduction. Like if you made an illustration, that illustration was shot and printed in short order, and the painting was never hung up on the wall. That's what those colors were good for. But if you painted with them in a painting that was supposed to be hung on the wall, they would eventually fade. And I found I did have pieces fade. And so I went, oh, I better clean up my act and become more selective about my color choices. And then at the same time, Winsor Newton and other manufacturers have eliminated some more fugitive colors and replaced them with more permanent colors. So if we go in here, we can look at, like, for instance, cobalt blue is, you have to look a little closely, sorry, is AA, very permanent, okay? And is very opaque. Wait, it's over here. It's very opaque. So we're looking for A or AA. And then I guess over here it has a 1, so that's the ASTM. But I'm not really looking at that very closely. I'm really looking at the A or AA. So a lot of these have A or they have AA. The cobalts in particular are very permanent. B, brilliant violet, I would not go for. So again, the violets tend to be fugitive. Move over here. Here we have these beautiful pinks. Opera pink, C, right? Not good. Permanent rose I have in my arsenal. I didn't have you buy it, I don't think, but so this is an A permanence. Rose Tyrian, C. So magenta is C. And opera rose is C, and Bengal rose. And these were notorious for being very brilliant in color, but very fugitive. So I have quinacridone, which I had you buy. And I think I have permanent rose, and I might have, I have alizarin crimson, but I don't have the others unless, unless I'm really going to do something that's not for hanging on the wall, but I really don't do that anymore. So, illustration has gone the way of the dinosaur in many respects. But you'll see that a lot of the earth colors are very permanent. They have double A's and A's, and a lot of the greens are very permanent. So most of what you have to worry about are the violets. We have permanent green light as a B, so something to note. But most of the greens are okay here. So depending upon how concerned you are about that, but I had the experience of having had pieces fade, and it's a little heartbreaking. So there you are. I can get out of this. Let's see. Oh, okay. It's a separate window. All right. So I'm going to stop the share here. There we go. So that's our information journey for today. And I'm pretty certain that other mediums like oil or acrylic are going to have the same resources on the Blick site. So if you have acrylics or oils and you want to know about the pigment, you want to know about the permanence, you want to know whether it's opaque or transparent, you can find out. And if you're buying a new pigment, and you go, God, that's a great color. What's it like? It tells you something about the handling properties and how permanent it is, and its tinting strength too. So that was our journey today.
I just have one question. So when I was in school, obviously I bought nice paints, but I've always just bought kind of the cheaper stuff, kind of, not even really branded,
Oh,
Loft. Do theirs tend to be less permanent in general, or not as
It
rich?
might not be about permanence that it's less expensive. It's probably more likely about pigment load.
Oh, okay.
So how much pigment is in the paint?
Right.
And so with artist quality paints, there's usually a certain level of pigment in the paint as a percentage, and it makes the paint mix more powerfully.
Okay.
And with student grade, because most of these manufacturers have, in oil or acrylic, have student lines. Not really with gouache. Gouache they don't, because gouache isn't ubiquitous enough, right? You don't have it. It's being used now more, but for a long time it was only a few. It was pretty nichey. But with acrylic and watercolor, I don't know about watercolor, but definitely with acrylic and oil, there are student grade. They're less expensive.
Yeah.
They don't even come out and say it's student grade. They call it a name. right? Like London oil color for Winsor Newton, or right, and that doesn't really indicate that it's student grade. So it's a little bit misleading in that. It would be nice if they came out with it and just said, well, this is student grade and it's good and it's less expensive, but it doesn't have the mixing power of artist quality. And then between manufacturers, there's quality differences. There are people who swear by Old Holland. Old Holland is in oil paint. I don't know if they make other lines, other mediums, but they're famous, been doing it forever, like a lot of these manufacturers. And they have a very, very high pigment load and high quality pigments, and they're really expensive. So I've never made the leap to Old Holland, but some artists swear by Old Holland and wouldn't use anything else. But I am, like acclimated to Winsor Newton
Yeah.
or Gamblin. And so they are good quality and have a high pigment load in their artist quality lines. But when I dipped my toe into water mixable oils, and I bought, and I researched it a little online and, looked at what was recommended, and I bought, brands that were recommended, and then I started to play with it. It was like, oh, I'm gonna, play around with this. And I started to, I mixed like a yellow, green, and I was trying to make it lighter with putting white, titanium white into it. And I'm piling this titanium white into this mixture. And then I'm squeezing more out, and then I'm piling more of it into this mixture, and it's not changing. So the color shift I'm looking for isn't changing, but my pile is getting bigger. And I went, what? What the heck? Right? And that's where you can get frustrated when you're trying to make a difference in a mixture if you don't have paints that have a high enough pigment load. And you'll wind up, like I said, I'm piling white into this. It's not making a difference, and it should. And then I get this big blob of paint on my palette that's not the color I want. And it's actually too much paint. And I'm going, what's wrong? Well, then I went back to the internet and went, what the heck? And it turned out at that time that even Winsor Newton's water mixable oil line, which was called Artisan, I think, I'm not sure anyway, which I had some of, and then I had Duo Aqua. They were making their water mixables in student grade and not in artist grade. And that was what I was running into. And now, and at that point, Daniel Smith was the only manufacturer making water mixables in artist grade. So that's the kind of thing that you'll run into with student grade paints or lower quality paints. It's fine if you're used to that and you're not expecting anything different, then you've become, again, like I said, acclimated to it, you've adapted to it. There isn't really anything wrong with that, with using the cheapest thing you can get. I generally look for stuff on Facebook Marketplace that's higher quality, like Winsor Newton brand or other major brands. That's artist quality, and then see if I can get it for, a better deal than new. And I've also shopped on eBay at times looking for deals. But
Really see in our when we did this,
yes,
I can see because I had a Viridian instead of the one,
that's right, the Phthalo.
and I had a burnt umber that I didn't buy from
Right.
Windsor Newton. And both like looking at my thing, I'm like, wow, yeah, the Windsor Newton ones are beautiful, and then those two are like, eh.
So if you see that kind of difference and you are motivated to buy higher quality paints because of that, because I'm a lifetime artist and I've never made a lot of money, and I've always been on a budget. But at a certain point, your time and effort is wasted if you get a disappointing result, or if you can't mix the colors that you want to mix. For instance, if you have a cheaper paint and it doesn't have the pigment load, and you can't get the saturation you want, so the bright colors that, you know, the really, really intense colors that you want, or you can't get the dark colors that you want because the paint doesn't have enough of a pigment load, or it doesn't have high enough quality pigments. And some of the cheap paints, like Grumbacher is actually okay, right? It's not, I think in the 60s and 70s, it was highly regarded and it's fallen a little bit, but I use Grumbacher when somebody gives me paints because they took a class and now they don't want the, you know, now they're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. So here you can have my paints. Or maybe a family member passed away who painted, and they give me their supplies. And I go, sure. And a lot of times it's Grumbacher, and I'll still paint with it because Grumbacher is good enough brand, but no name brands I almost don't bother with because of, you know, the quality of pigment. If they don't have any pigment information on them, if there's, you know, like Dick Blick sometimes has had some, you know, really low quality acrylics that they've, um, you know, it's too risky, and I don't want to put my time into it if I can't mix the colors that I want to mix. So that's my spiel on that. And you might find that it's worth it to you to have a smaller palette with higher quality colors that you can mix a lot of different things with.
Mhm.
And that's what I do with oils. I have a huge arsenal of paints over here. I have this chest full of paints, you know. Uh, and I have a lot of different paint colors from different brands, artist quality brands. But I tend to now use a a a palette that is what do they call it? A double primary palette. So it has all the primaries plus white, but it has a warm and cool primary, right? Warm and cool yellow, warm and cool red, warm and cool blue. That don't, you know, and then I have burnt umber, which is sort of my big neutralizer. And so if I want to travel or I want to cart something out to paint plein air, I'm not toting as much paint. That makes me happy. And then if I'm laying out the paint on my palette, it's not taking me as long because there's not as many tubes, and that makes me happy. And I can mix most of what I want from the colors that I choose, which are pretty saturated. They're pretty intense colors, pretty strong yellows, strong colors that will mix what I want. Then I can neutralize them to make duller colors.
Mhm.
So that's, I mostly only reach into my chest of drawers over here when I really need, you know, I really need that paint that I can't get from the two reds that I have on my palette, right? Or I really need, you know, this, whatever it is, it's a particular bright color that I can't get out of the palette that I generally use. Or I need it, really need a black. Like I've added dioxazine to that core palette because of the nice black that it makes, and then it also makes a decent purple. Um, so you don't necessarily have to buy a lot of colors in order to do what you want to do. And you might think about buying fewer colors in just a palette that you can mix a lot of things with, which is what I was aiming for in the palette that I gave you on the materials list here. But you might buy higher quality paints and then not expect to have 50 colors because you really, there are artists who I've seen who lay out just a huge amount of colors on their palette. Um, and that's actually not how I work. So they work a different way. They want to have all those colors on their palette, all these different 15 different blues, right? So that they can just dip into them when they want, but then they dry on your palette. I mean, unless you can fit it into the freezer, and then you waste the paint. Um, anyway, so this is how I work, and you might run into other instructors who work differently. Okay, so I'm going to switch the camera here. Yes, way. It's like a miracle every time it comes up. Yay. Now we can see, you guys can see, I'm really glad. So I'm sorry I can't fit all of this onto my screen here, but I'll move things around so that you can see somewhat. And I'm going to move my water over here. And I have my paper towel here for wiping my brush off. And I have a few brushes laid out here. So we can talk a little bit about brushes now. There are several basic brush shapes. One is a flat, one is a bright, one is a filbert, and obviously a round and a fan shape, right? But that's sort of a specialty shape. I don't really have any filberts that I've bought that are watercolor brushes, but I do buy filberts for oil painting. But usually, so these two brushes, I just hold them here, used to be identical, but now I've worn this one down by painting with it over the course of years. So this was originally a flat, it had a flat tip, a little bit longer, but this one is worn down, like the corners are worn down, and it's not as long it's not as the bristles aren't as long now. But this was originally a flat. And usually flats will with use will get worn down to be what is a filbert, where it's a filbert or cat's tongue, it's really more of a U shape. So the corners are worn off. This is also a flat. So a flat is longer and blunt at the end, right? Squared off. A bright is shorter, like this is a bright that's been worn down on the corners. It's a little small bright, but it's been worn down on the corners again, almost into a filbert. But a bright doesn't have the length of bristle, but it's also squared off at the end. This is technically a bright because a flat would have longer bristles, longer like this, right? And the reason for the longer bristles, which you probably, so did you both do watercolor or was it just one?
I've done watercolor.
You've done watercolor. Okay,
I've
Emily.
taken one single day watercolor class.
Okay, so in watercolor you have a lot. The brushes are supposed to carry a lot of water. They're supposed to carry a lot of paint with water, your mixture, whatever. And the bigger brushes, the mops that you use for doing washes, they carry a whole lot of water. And so a flat brush carries more paint. And in our case, it's not maybe as much water as it is like a pigment mixture. In oil and acrylic, it's whatever mixture you've got. But a flat is longer because it carries more paint. And that enables you to make a longer brush stroke before you run out, right? Before it gets dry. And a bright carries not as much paint, although this is wider, but if it were the same width, it wouldn't carry as much paint as this flat. And it's got because it's shorter, you can put more pressure on the tips. So with a flat, because it's longer, I can't put as much pressure, right? It bows before I can really put pressure on the tips. So with a bright, you can put more pressure on the tips, and that has an impact on your painting, particularly in oil painting, right? But also in gouache, where you have more control. So with a bright, I can maneuver around things, and be pretty nimble. And with a flat, I'm not quite as nimble because of the length of the brushes. So, but with both of these brushes, I can use them flat, or I can use them on the side to varying degrees. So I can make a line, I can make a line with my flat, and I don't necessarily need a round to make a line. And I can also angle the brush to make a wider line. So I can do a lot of things with a flat and a bright. I can get a lot done. So if I have this brush, which I did this with, full of paint, which I mixed there, that's now dry, Then I've got it loaded. I can go across using the flat. I can even come in close using the flat. Then I can reload it and I can use the corner of it. I'm using the corner of it to go around the edges of things because I'm not that concerned about being exact. I can come over here and use the corner of it to go around things, which is what I did. So I find these brushes much more useful than rounds. I've got a bunch of rounds here, and they're just not as useful to me as flats and brights. And then I've also got some, smaller detail brushes. Now these are useful because when I want to go in, I want to soften an edge. If an edge is too hard, I want to soften an edge. I might use a detail brush. If I want to come in and I want to make a really hard edge, then I might use a detail brush. If I want to get some detail like here, I'm going to be working on this and pulling out some form using a lighter color, a color with more white maybe. Then I'll use a detail brush, but I'll also use one of these smaller flats, so that I can make a broader stroke. So, those are the things I'm going to be doing today. Let's see. So I'm looking at my piece and I'm looking at the photo, and as the artist, I get to make judgment calls. At the moment, I see that this tulip is much lighter than I have here, but I kind of like the form that I have. I kind of like the richer color. So for now, I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to lighten this up to that degree at this time. I might save it for later, but I want to make some adjustments elsewhere. For instance, this line right here on the edge of this tulip is too hard, and here it's much softer. I'm going to soften that. I'm going to lighten this leaf edge here. I'm going to come into these red tulips and lighten them a bit because I see these nice oranges and lighter values in here. And I want to see how I can improve matters there. I might soften other edges. For instance, along this edge here is nice and soft, but I can see the edge of the leaf, but it's softer. So I can soften that. I can make this more definite. I can refine, like I'm going to refine this leaf, as we said. I can refine some of the stuff in here. And I can darken areas if I want to, because I don't think I used dioxazine. And I can compare, I can see if dioxazine will get some areas darker. That's the question I want to answer. So I'd like to show you how to soften edges. Like this tulip has a softer edge here. In the photo, it's a little softer. This edge is nice and soft and diffused. So I can control that. And then with my background, what I'm going to do, I'm going to deviate from the photo and show you some ways to play around with the background using a bigger brush. Because with gouache, if you're using too small of a brush for broader areas, things will get really textured because you won't be able to cover enough area fast enough. And so then you might start to get a lot of modeling in the background. And the thing is that with gouache, I really learned to paint using brush strokes to create form, to create gradations using brush strokes in different ways, because gouache doesn't really do smooth gradations very well. You can get into a big mess trying to make smooth gradations. And so I've used brush strokes and texture as a device so that I can skirt the smooth gradation issue. It's hard to control the smooth gradations, not unlike oil paint where you can make smooth gradations. You can like work the paint and work the paint, and it'll, you know, eventually you can make smooth gradations. And so I use different ways, different methods to create the illusion of form. And usually that includes some brush stroke. All right, so I'm picking up, now I basically put water on this paint that was dried on my palette. I'm going to add a little bit more here. This is phthalo. So some of these have soaked up water. I'm adding a little bit more water. I might have to lay out more paint. I'm adding more. So cadmiums, notoriously, they take more water they have to absorb water longer. This has been absorbing water for a little while I was waiting for you guys to join the meeting. Let me look here.
So what colors are you using?
But right now I'm just adding water to my paint at this point. And oh, just a warning, I am recording on my camera as well as, you know, through Zoom, and it's like I have to learn to juggle a few balls, and my camera, a lot of these cameras have a limit. They'll like record for 30 minutes. I think my limit on my camera is 30 minutes. So if the camera cuts out, then I just, like, if this camera that you're watching right now cuts out, then I just basically have to, you know, re-up the recording, and it'll come back on, she says. I'm going to look at my camera here. I'm standing up and seeing how much more time I've got. Oh, you're supposed to be recording, why aren't you?
So, sorry, none of my, I don't have any paints left on my palette. I guess, so what
Yeah,
color are you starting with?
I washed mine off.
Wash your palette. Well, then you can lay out more paint. So I'm using, I have ultramarine blue, I have phthalo.
Was that the green?
I have phthalo blue, and yes, there's phthalo blue and there's phthalo green.
So you have,
I have ultramarine blue. I have Windsor blue is the phthalo. I'm sorry. That's their proprietary thing. They call phthalo blue Windsor blue, just to confuse everybody. All right. And then the color that they have for phthalo blue has white in it. So it's not this nice dark color that we can use for so many things. So I have ultramarine blue. I have Windsor blue, which I think I had on my list. Cadmium red, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. This is perline maroon, which we used for our dark. I'm going to add a little bit here. Perline maroon. I have burnt umber. So you can experiment, if you like, with not washing your palette, seeing how the paint re-wets after it dries. It's just a matter of experimentation, and it certainly saves money if you're not washing all your paint away. But there are downsides to it. I often have to lay out a little bit of new paint next to the dried so that I can have fully saturated thick paint if I need it. Because when I add white onto these dried paint colors, it makes them more watery. Okay, and I have Windsor green here, which they no longer make, but you were using, I think, Lauren, you were using Viridian instead. But I also have Winsor Newton Viridian here. But it doesn't have as much, it's dark, but it doesn't have as much intensity. Put it up there. It's not as dark. It's a little less dark, and it doesn't have the tinting strength. So you can actually see on my palette the difference between the two, that this green, which is Viridian, is not as dark in value as the phthalo. And I'm going to put out a little bit, well, a little more white so that I have a fresh, don't use your teeth, Joanne. Okay, let's see. Okay, got it. So that I have thicker white if I need it. So I'm putting it right there. So I'm going to show you a few techniques on this painting, and then, we'll move on to, we can do another paint along from the photos that I sent you, but probably not today. We won't move on today. Um, and we'll use these techniques again, right? So that you can see them again and try them out again. And if you have questions like you did, Lauren, or you have work that you're doing at home that you want to talk about, you can take a photo of it and send me a photo, and I can screen share it. And I can also make it possible for you to screen share. So you can just share from your device or from your laptop too. So it can work either way. If you have a shot of it and you are sharing from your own laptop, then I can make that possible. The only problem with that scenario is that if I'm the one doing the sharing, I'm the one controlling the cursor, so I can point to things more easily. Whereas if you're doing the sharing, you're the one that controls the cursor, and so it makes it awkward for me when I'm trying to describe what I'm talking about, or where, point to something. Okay. So let's see. I'm going to start. I'm going to take. I'm going to start with these two red tulips. Let me move this down a little bit. Yeah. Because the red that I laid in is, I have darker darks here, and they're not as intense. Now, can I get them to approach the intensity of red that I see here is my question, right? And you can't always, because you have print medium using inks, and then you have paint. But what you can do is try to get it as close as you can, if that's what you want. So I'm going to try to do that. So I'm using my nubby flat my nubby, yeah, it's a nubby flat that I've worn down, right? Because I want to put some paint over this. So because it's gouache, there's no stigma about using it opaquely. So I can use the opaque qualities of cadmium red and cadmium orange and cadmium yellow, maybe a bit, and some white, to go over and try to duplicate the more intense reds that I see here. So I'm wetting my brush a bit, but I appear to differ from many people who paint in gouache, because I use gouache transparently a lot and layer it. So this isn't completely thick and creamy here. It's got some light showing through it. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in some of these areas where I see more intense red and see how I feel about it. So it's a little transparent what I put down, and I can see my brush strokes through it. If I want to make it really opaque, I can pick up, I'm working into my dried pile, right? It's softened a bit here. And so it's thicker. I'm getting some thicker paint and going, I think I will, if I want to go really opaquely over, now I've made an opaque stroke and it's obliterating what I had underneath. Now I can come down closer here. Let's play around with this. Move. I have to kind of move my painting so that it's in the right sweet spot. So I can come down here and get closer so you can see a little bit, but then we're going to lose the photo. So this is still wet because I actually used quite a bit of paint here, and I'm going to let it dry. I can work into wet paint somewhat. I'm kind of lightening my darks based on the photo where it's more intense, right? I'm going, This is more intense. I want more red. And this cadmium red is just the ticket. So in oil painting, a lot of times your lay-in, that like we did here, is going to get painted over, and it serves a purpose. The purpose is that it gets all your colors onto your board or your canvas in that circumstance. It gets colors onto the board, it gets values in place, and you're making, I'm going to do this flower, this tulip also. You know, you're making, let's back up again. So I pulled back out here. Because you're making choices based on color then that is already in place. Because what will happen is if you paint from one corner of the piece, you know, and you creep along, right? And you just paint sort of progressively across the painting, and you have white space all around where you're painting, right? And this is, I certainly absolutely did this when I was younger, right? When I was painting on my own. I wanted to get this corner perfect, right? Or I said, I'm going to start with the tulips and I'm going to make them perfect. And then I'm going to move on to this tulip. And then I'm going to move on to these leaves, right? And they're all going to be perfect before I move on. And that's really pretty common that people paint this way. But the problem with it is that you might get, and I've done this, really, I've learned the hard way. You might get your tulip perfect and then discover that it's too dark or discover that it's not dark enough. So then your perfect tulip that you spent hours or whatever time painting, now you have to paint it, you know, you have to make adjustments to it, and much of your work might be lost. And it took me a long time to get over my insecurity about not getting my perfect tulip first. I had to reassure myself I could do it. I was like, oh no, I really need to get this perfect. And then I know that I can go ahead, that I still have the ability to do that. And now I can paint the rest of the painting. But then I ran into all these problems where I then had to redo work because it was the wrong value, or it was the wrong, not quite the right color. Usually the issue is value. And then as I progressed across the painting, after I paint my perfect tulip, I would progress to this tulip, and then I would progress to the leaf, right? And I go, oh, now I see that I'm having trouble fitting this leaf in with, you know, this whole picture. And how do I, you know, now I see that this is really, I've made this really too detailed and too picky, and it would have been better if I'd not gone to such detail, but I didn't know that because I was making it perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times with oil, and definitely the way I'm painting with gouache, I'm saying I want to get some values down, some good dark values. I want to get colors in place. I'm going to get a background in. I've got my greens, right, roughly in place. I've got some lights. Maybe things could be lighter, right, in areas, right, like maybe that tulip or maybe this leaf up here, right, where it's lighter right there. But that's not as important as how these colors are interacting in this whole space. And so once I have this, like we did, then I can start making adjustments and judgments. And so my judgment was, oh, I have too dark, my darks are too dark. So I went and I painted over them basically with cadmium. I left some darks a little bit darker right here. I left that a little darker right there, right? I've left some things darker, but I painted over a lot of the darks that I had there with cadmium. And so now I have more reds to work with. So then I can come in and go, okay, and there's no problem with going, what we say, push and pull, right? I can still go back in and go, oh, I can make this darker again, right? Like this is darker, so I'm going to make that darker again, even though maybe I just made it lighter. I can push and pull with gouache, which is harder to do with watercolor, but it's certainly something that you do with oil. So I have this old mixture of perline maroon, and I think it had Windsor green or Viridian in it. And this is like a dark red, but I used more of the green in there to make this really dark that I used here. So I'm picking up this what is it, the perline maroon. I'm adding some more to it. And I've got some Windsor green or Viridian to mix into it. Ooh, okay, so there's my dark. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Because of course, Windsor green is phthalo and it's super powerful in a mixture. So I'm washing off my brush. You can't see it, sorry, it's off screen. Because I had it full of too much of that phthalo. And what I want is a color closer to this. So I washed off my brush. I'm wiping off the water, coming back over here, and picking up some more of this perline maroon to make. And then I can grab some of this Windsor green and pull it over, right, to make this sort of a brownish red. And my mixture is a little bit too dry. So I just picked up a tiny bit of water. So if I really need to control how much water I'm adding, I'm going to move over here. Here's my water bucket. I want to control how much water I'm adding. Look, I can move all the way over here. I'm going to move all the way over. Running into some stuff here, but there. Okay, so now you can see my water bucket a little bit better. You can see my paper towel better. Because it's really, watercolor is similar. It's really about controlling how much water you have in your paint. So I had too dry of a mixture because, when I'm mixing the paint, it's making little ridges like, the paint is so dry that it's basically making a dry brush puddle here. So I just went to my bucket and I will support my brush on the edge and just slide it down and just pick up a tiny bit of water. I just dip the edge of the brush into the water. And if I'm worried about how much water I got, I might offload some water onto my paper towel because I don't need a lot. I just needed to loosen up, as I say, loosen up the puddle here. And if I put too much water in here, then it's going to be too transparent. And then I'm going to, I can come over here. I need to make more of a puddle. I need more paint. This is one of my flaws. One of the things I struggle with, I need to mix more paint at a time. I usually mix these tiny bits and then I don't have enough. And now I'm back to going, okay, my paint's a little too dry and I just need this little tiny bit of water, not too much. Might have to offload some onto my paper towel. And I can also offload it, out here if I want, and then gauge. Okay, so now I have this sort of a brownish red again. I'm looking at my tulip. I don't really want I don't want to take a whole brush full of paint and just plop it down there. I want to be able to make it a little bit gradated. So I've got less paint on my brush. I offloaded it onto here. And I'm going to go, okay. And then I'm going to put in another stroke here, there. And now I'll wash off my brush. Wipe off the water. Sorry, you can't see all of it. I need to get the majority of the water out of my brush. But I have my brush is wet, but it's not dripping water. It's not fully loaded with water. And I can come with this wet brush and I can soften this edge right here. So I might turn on a light. I would have to move over if I want to get too much closer here. That's okay. I'm mobile. I can do this. I can do this. If I want to zoom in, so you can see better, then I will turn on another light. Because when I zoom in, things get the camera doesn't capture as much light. That's a little better. All right. But I find when I zoom out, there's a little too much light. Oh, sorry, you guys. It's a working studio. I'm knocking stuff over, but no matter. Okay, so maybe you can see a little bit better what I'm doing, a little bit more detail here, right here. So what I want to do is soften this edge so that it's a little bit more like the photo. The photo is a little softer of an edge here. Whoops, sorry, moving my there. It's a little softer edge. And I can do that with my wet brush that I've rinsed, all right? So this is already dried. See, I'm rubbing my finger over it. It's already dried because it wasn't really thick paint. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to manipulate it. I'm reactivating it to a certain degree. I'm going like this. Soften this edge right here. I'm reactivating it and rearranging it. And now it's wet. I'm going to see when it dries. I just rinsed my brush again because I want to kind of come down here and reactivate this line and soften it. Now, if this doesn't work, then I think it works well enough. But if it didn't work, then I can take my small little detail round here, and I can finesse it with using small strokes. So I take my small detail round, and I want to finesse this shadow and be a little bit more particular. I can. So I'm just picking up some of this dark, and I don't. So if I want to make a dark line, then I want the paint to be thicker, but it still needs to flow. So my paint's a little dry. So you're always adjusting how much water is in your paint. How dry is it? And you'll learn to feel it and observe it. So if I want to make a dark line, I can. I picked up a bunch of this thicker paint. I'm rolling my brush. I'm rolling it in the paint to make the tip pointed. So say I really want to make it dark here. I'm going to come here and go like this. So I can really control. I put it up here just because that's where there is a dark. So I was able to put this dark, and you're seeing a little bit of reflection from the light there. See, so I put my hand, block the light, and you can see that it's dark. So I can make I can make a detail area. I can make a line that's pretty dark by picking up a good amount of paint that's not too watery and coming in and going, okay, now I want to bring this dark down here to pop out the edge of this flower. So I go, okay, I'm going to do this. So if you really want the ultimate control, you can pick up your little detail brush. The problem is that you will often get, a very picky looking painting if you do the whole painting with this thing. Plus, it's going to take you forever, especially if you cross-hatch this whole background. So, but you can, and then if I want to adjust some areas in the shadow using this brush, I will use paint that is more translucent and not so thick. So I'm adding some water, and I'm picking up paint that's not as thick. And now I can come in and I can put in little tiny strokes. But if I had a loaded brush, my paint would be too dark and definite. So by making my paint more translucent, I can put down a less definite dark line here, right? So, and you can really control the paint this way by using brush stroke. So in this case, I'm using hatching, which is where my strokes are all in the same direction. So you can do that. And then if you go, oh, God, that's really kind of dark. I'd like a little bit more light in there. I'm going to take some of my cadmium red here, and I'm going to put a little bit more light back into that. So see how you can go back and forth, right? And I can take my brush and I can go little tiny strokes, and go, I really want to have it look a little lighter and not so dark. So now I can hatch over this, right? And I can put a little reflected light in down here. And I can even go back into what I just did and modify it. So this is stuff that you can do. You can get this controlled with gouache, okay? But I don't really make whole paintings like that anymore. Whoops. I don't really make whole paintings like that anymore. Sorry, I got some ultramarine blue on my brush. Not sure how I did that. Because it's much more interesting to me to have different brush effects. But this is a way you can really control the paint. You can mix color this way because you can layer color. And this would be really appropriate for your small paintings, Lauren, that you're talking about.
Mhm.
You can hatch and you can cross hatch and you can mix color by layering it, because this brush isn't carrying so much water that it's going to go through the layers that are underneath. So you can paint on top of layers of paint you've already put down, as long as the paint is dry, and modify areas and be very specific. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lighten some of this with some other cadmiums. And I'm going to use a bigger brush. I'm going to go back to my nubby flat here that I've got. And I want to mix some like I see some oranges and I see some yellows in this photo. I'm going to pull the photo down here. Getting a little reflection there. Okay. So I see some yellows and some oranges in this photo. So having the additional light basically creates more reflection. But if I'm going to be zoomed in, then it takes more light for you to see things. So usually what I do is I'll get, and this is also the case in oils, and I do encourage my students to try to do this. It takes time and experience for them to develop the confidence to do it. But I try to get as much done as I can with bigger brushes. And then I do the small refinements with smaller brushes, but I'm not licking the entire image with my small brush, like all over, right? So it doesn't have all the same texture, but I use bigger brushes to try to get the broader strokes in. So I'm adding a little bit of white to my cadmium mixture here. I've got oranges, I've got cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. I've got white on my brush. I'm going to put it here because I don't want to just drop it into my mixture. I want to control it. And I can always go and pick up more white. But I'm using the white more translucently again. So I'm using a lot of transparent watercolor ideas when I paint with gouache. That's just how I've adapted to doing it over the years. So let's see what happens. I'm kind of mixing this orange yellow color, and I'm going to come in, and it's not very thick. I'm going to let some of this red show through. So it's translucent on my palette. I come in and go, okay, well, it's lighter here, and it's lighter here, right? So so you can see that my strokes are very translucent. And if I want to adjust it, so as it dries, it's disappearing even more, but you can see maybe a little bit of the subtleties that I can achieve here. And I go, okay, well, maybe I want to have a little bit more firepower going on, right? So I put a little bit more white into my mixture. I'm making it a little bit more, a little less transparent. I loaded my brush here and go, okay, there. So now I've made more of a mark, but I can still see through. So I can adjust my approach and I can layer over that. And I'm using brush strokes that are guided by what I'm seeing here in the photo. So looking at what I'm seeing in the photo, I'm using brush strokes that are affected by what I see, the directionality of it. I can pick up some more white and go based on what I'm experiencing here. I'm going, oh, I could use a little bit more. And if I put too much down, I often will take my finger and pick some up if I go, well, that was a little too much. But I can also fix things. So in the photo, I see that here, this yellow, there's not really a very big distinction between this yellow tulip and the light area on this red tulip. And so I have a dark right here, and I'm going to fix that because I like it when things don't look all cut out. And I like it when there's an area that blends into another area on an object. Because if I don't observe that, then things will look cut out. So I took a little bit of opaque red, cadmium red with my oranges, and I'm just basically painting opaquely over this area and fixing that problem, right? I'm going, I really actually want this yellow tulip to bleed a little bit into this red tulip and not have a hard edge. So I put that back there. And yeah, this is my thought process as I'm painting, but I'm having to slow down so I can explain what I'm doing. So now I've got this dark here that, you know, on the photo isn't as dark, and so I'm going to come over. So I can put color down and go, that's not really what I'm thinking. That's not really close to what I'm seeing. So I'm going to adjust it. And it's almost never a tragedy if I get it wrong. In fact, there, I just got that wrong. It's too light. See, it's too light and it's too cool. If you look at the photo, too light and it's too cool there compared to here. So I'm making an adjustment. I'm like, oh, whoops, too much white. So I'm going to add more red to this mixture and come at it again. Here. Down. And I can take a breath and I can let that dry so that I see, you know, it still looks really cool. It particularly looks cool on camera, but I'm going to let it dry a bit more because I can see it's not quite dry. And then I'm going to warm it up. And I can warm it up by putting basically, well, I call it a glaze, but it's also could be considered a wash over it, but it has to be dry. And it's not quite there yet. Because if I go in before it's dry, then it'll just lift. Or I'll even go right through the paint and create a big puddle of mixed paint. And I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to, now also by waiting till it's dry, I can see the color more clearly because it was lighter. And now I'm thinking, well, okay. I'm going to adjust my plan now based on the dry color. Adding more white to this. Add some orange, maybe some yellow. So warming it up. Woo, okay. That was kind of a lot. So I do this when I'm painting in oils too. I adjust what I'm doing based on what I see. I'll put test colors down. And this is why I like this. I like painting with gouache better than watercolor because in watercolor, much less room to make mistakes. And then you can ruin a whole painting and then you have to, start over. And I don't know, that just frustrates me too much. I think that the stringency of that makes me feel too tense. And so I prefer to have something that has a back door. This has a back door, right? I can make changes, I can fix stuff, and I prefer that. So I'm coming in with a little bit more red down here. So now I'm washing out my brush just because we're working on this. I can come over here and work on this too, but I wanted to come in with my little brush and put some of the dark edges here into this. So I'm going back up here to my puddle of dark paint, and I want to control how dark it is. And so I'm going to let some of the background color show through. So I'm making it more translucent. And I'm rolling my brush to make the point here, there. Sometimes I don't know if I want to go in with too much paint on my brush, and so because that'll make things darker. So I'm going to draw the edge of this petal in. And I can make this shape here. And I'm just painting over the red paint that was there. Picking up a little bit more water. Sometimes I just want even less pigment. Pulling this over. And I'm feeling a little bit frustrated by my tiny brush because I can't make big enough strokes, but so I'm going to come here and go, okay, now I'm going to bring this down and re-emphasizing this, the edge of this petal here, like it is here. Just following my photo again here and putting this in. And then behind this is a lighter petal. And so, it really depends upon how, I'm going to call it slavish, how slavish you want to adhere to the photo. So generally, I think to myself, well, this is the most important thing in front, these petals. That is not as important back there, like this stuff here. So I'm going to be less worried about being, I don't know, true to the photo. And I'm just picking, so I'm just picking up a red that I've already mixed before and coming in back here and just differentiating that there's a dark petal and a lighter petal. And again, I can adjust my color at any time. If I think that it's not what I want, I go, oh, that's not really what I wanted. I think I'll change it. So this is showing you a little bit of how you can be pretty controlled with gouache and you can be pretty picky with gouache and be detailed with gouache. So now this is dried and I'm going, okay, well, I want a little bit more red. Observe really where there's more red. All right, so I'm going to go here. I think I'm going to sneeze here in a second, so please excuse me. Sorry. Hate it when I get a tickle like this. Probably another one coming. So I put some more red down here. Okay. And down here. So just showing you how, and usually I'm much quicker, but I just want to make it clear to you what I'm doing and kind of narrate, the amount of water that's in my brush. I'm going to put this little bit of shadow in here, there. I picked up some of this dark again, that's watery dark. And I'm just going to, using a hatching technique to create the grain of this petal is, these small tiny lines. So this is, similar. And now I can come up here and pick out this. I'm just using it. I'm using, sometimes I take my little tiny brush and I flatten it. So I'm picking up the paint and I'm splaying the bristles like this. And so now my brush is flat. So you've seen me, like, when I want to do a tiny little edge, I roll my brush to make a point, right? While I'm picking up the paint, I roll my brush. I'm picking up paint, but I'm keeping my brush flat and kind of splaying the bristles, picking that up. And then I can make broader brush strokes for hatching like this. Probably need a little bit more water, but I can make broader hatch strokes. I'm picking up a tiny bit more water because my paint got a little too dry. So this is you and me, Lauren. We're both sniffling, huh?
Yeah.
So these are the things that I can do with my brush, to get different effects coming down, around the outside. Can decide how slavish I want to be to the photo. But there's a dark edge that creates this edge of the flower. So this is, some picky detail work that I just jumped into to try to show you how controlled you can be with gouache and how you can, go back and forth with it, make corrections, use your brushes in certain ways to get certain effects. Sometimes I don't want to be super tiny and picky, and I want to have a flatter stroke with my small brush. And a variety of brush strokes really adds richness to the painting. So there's another petal here. Again, I'll say, well, how slavish do I want to be? But yeah, we can put this in if we want to there. Okay. I think that I'm going to make this darker, not quite creating the form that I want. So I'm going to play around with that for a second. So I came in, this dark was too dark, so I came in over it. If this was making too dark of a line, I went, no, that's too dark of a line. So I was able to fix it and put in a little bit of this little scalloped action, that sort of scallop shape here. Up some more dark and putting in a little bit of an edge here. So come in. So I'm softening this edge right here. I had a little too dark of an edge up against this light, and I just took the wet brush and re-wet the paint and softened those two edges together to make a softer transition. I want to put in a little bit more dark here, or red. And now I'm hatching, and I'm actually creating more of a texture intentionally to emulate the the little tiny lines on the petal. And I can do the same thing by mixing a light. So now I can come in here on this set of petals. See, I haven't really done this petal, but we're just working right here. I go, okay, well, I haven't really got a light yet that is picking out these areas effectively, right? But I find that with gouache, it's important to develop all the middle tones, the middle values, and then really just put in lights very judiciously. So I've got white right here. I'm adding some yellow to it. I'm thinking, maybe, maybe, I'm thinking, maybe, maybe some red. Now I'm going to pick this up, rolling my brush to make a point here. Sometimes I offload the paint so I don't come in with a big blob of paint. And I go, okay, let's see how this dries on here. And because I'm using such a small line, it should dry really quickly. So I can quickly see if I need more white paint into it or if it's, where I want it to be. And then I can also come in and go, okay, that wasn't light enough, so I'm going to make it lighter. Or I can come in and fix it and go, oh, that's too dark. I'm going to make it darker. So I'm using this little hatching technique here to create this area on the flower. So one thing I can do if I'm going, okay, I really want to have this be light and lighter there, and lighter here, and it kind of comes down. And I can go, okay, I got all this white puddle here, and I put it in here, but now I think it needs to be warmer. But I want to get the value lightened up. So I'm going to use a technique here called, which is basically glazing. I put this light area in. Okay, yeah. So I put this light area in. I'm going to hit some of these really light bits a little bit harder. Hold some more white into my mixture, a little bit of yellow. Yeah. There, there. So I can build up these brush strokes. And I let it dry, and it takes like no time to dry because the brush strokes are so tiny, okay? So I can let it dry, and then I can adjust it any way that I want now. But one thing I'm going to do then, this is a little cool for my taste, okay? I want it to be warmer. I can come back in and I can put this ridge in right here. Is that your kitty? Is that a kitty?
Yeah. That's my girl.
Yeah, I've got two of my own, so they're locked out because,
Yeah.
one of mine would be throwing up on my stuff, and the other one, they just get up here and stomp all over everything. So I'm just putting some little details back in here. So now what I can do is I'm taking my, blunt brush, and I say to myself, well, I want it to be a little bit more yellow, maybe a little more orange, I don't know. And I'm going to add some water to this. There we go. All right, so it's transparent. My brushes, I have a full brush. You can always offload some onto your paper towel. And then very quickly, and without, one stroke, I'm going to drop that glaze over my paint. Not, and I can come in here and go like this. So I can tint it by doing that and make it warmer. And then if I think it's too light, I can do even more than that. I can go, oh, well, and I do this a lot. I play around with the form. I almost can't stop myself here, sorry. I go, oh, I want this to be lighter. I want this to come down. I'm using my brush and I'm using it on its end and like the corner of it there. So trying to flesh out this petal. So that shows you some ways that you can use gouache very exactly, right? And very controlled. I might finish this petal here, but I'd like to show you a couple more things. Let me check the time here. It's 11:30. Okay, well, let's see. Let's do a couple more things. I want to soften this edge right here because it's bothering me. So I can even use my clean brush with some water on it. It's a wet brush. First thing I can do is I can come in and I can re-wet the paint and just see if I can just blend it a little bit and re-wet the paint. There. Like that. That is one way of doing it right there. When I look at my photo, and this is much warmer, maybe a slightly different shape than I have here. So I'm going to let this dry and I'm going to, come back in with a little bit warmer color and maybe change the shape to more of a goblet shape than I have here. Okay, well, let's see. I've got orange going on because this is pretty warm. I'm going to add some yellow to it. Let's see. I'm going to drop it over this. And then go from there. I'm going to go, okay, I'm changing the shape of it to more of a goblet just using this brush. Pushing out that way. So I don't want to start the background. I'm going to think we're going to do the background next week. Are there any questions from you guys? Is this clear? Am I being too detailed in my descriptions, or is that a good thing? Is that helpful? I'm kind of narrating here as I'm going, how much water I have in my brush, how transparent my paint is, what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think it's helpful.
Is it helpful? Yeah.
The more detailed you can be, the better.
Okay. It just depends upon, I think that what I found with my classes is that when people, in my oil painting classes, you have similar paint handling issues and issues with brushes, right? The issues are similar, even though it's a different medium and even, difference between oil and a water medium, that people, I have to kind of break it down and say, now I'm, offloading water off my brush, because it's too wet, right? And I don't want to go in there with a big wet soppy brush. I want to control what I have on my brush, and some of this is going to be feel that you develop. But I also don't want to be too tedious if it's tedious for you guys.
No, the amount of water on the brush is always like a struggle for me too. So
Yeah.
that's good to hear. Which,
Okay.
yeah, that.
I can only tell you verbally, and I can't really tell you. I can't come over and help you feel it. But even in my in-person classes, I come over and work on people's paintings so they can see more clearly, right, than you guys can see because they're in person. But even then, people still have to get in there and struggle and feel it themselves. And then quite often they go, "Oh, what did I do wrong here? You know, where am I going? Where am I going wrong? You know." But can you see what we're doing here? This is how detailed in particular you can get. But I usually try to not be too picky with this little tiny round brush, or else everything will have the same texture. So next week we can work more on this tulip. I'm not going to, we're not necessarily going to get a finished painting here. This is really just to get you, to show you some different techniques, but I really want to play around with the background for you. So because I'm going to be using a bigger brush, I'm going to be messing up the paint, I'm going to be reactivating it. I want to darken edges, even though it's not what we have on the photo, right? I want to darken some edges. I'll probably put a gradation in along the side of the piece. That's what I'm thinking. Darken this side of the piece so that it gradates up, right? Then I have to change the relationship between a dark background and some of these leaves, right? It's a different relationship from what I have in the photo. But I also have to paint dark over light and try to create some gradation, but like I told you, I tend to not try to have a completely smooth gradation in the background because of how difficult it is, but also I find it a little bit dull. And so I try to use brushstroke creatively to suggest space behind and create the gradation that I want. But also there's a balance between brushstroke in the background and if you have also more interesting stuff going on in here that's going to draw the viewer's eye. So all of that. Okay. I don't necessarily have any homework for you. I don't think you really want homework. You can play around with the paint. Try out what I talked about here, which was sort of on the picky side, right? We were doing sort of the picky detail stuff. But I actually think that's easier for some people to do than to do the bold, washy stuff with the big brushes. So I'll see you next week. I might send you a couple files to print out that we can talk about at the beginning of class. If you have anything that you want us to talk about, any piece that you want me to look at, including this one, if you have questions, go ahead and take a photo. You can email me the photo, and then I'll upload it, and we'll be able to screen share it and talk about it. Oh, I should turn off this camera.
Are there one or two more classes?
Oh, there's more than that. Let's see. This is the third class.
Because I swear I got confused because I saw something that I thought said that this was, when I signed up, I thought it was longer.
It's 7 weeks. It's 7 weeks.
It is 7. Okay.
Yeah.
I saw something that I swear I thought I saw something say that it was only 4 sessions.
Oh.
Today I saw it and I was like, what? Really?
No.
Okay.
No, it's 7 weeks. We have much more time. This is our third class. And so we have another 4 weeks.
Cool. Okay.
And we have a lot that we can play around with. Like I said, I'm not necessarily going to get this painting finished, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's value in me working on it while, rather than working on it with you. I'm not sure there's value there. So, all right. So I'll see you next week. If you have any questions, and write them down and we'll address them in the class. Okay.
Sounds good.
Have a good Saturday.
Yeah, you too.
Okay.
Thank you.